Thank you for listening and supporting the Daily Memphian. Sign up for one of our many free newsletters and breaking news alerts at dailymemphian.com/email to receive the latest local news stories impacting our community. Our weekly newsletters cover everything from sports to arts and culture, business, food, and more, along with daily updates of all the news we publish each day. Sign up or manage your email preferences at dailymemphian.com/email.
Welcome to the latest edition of the Daily Memphis Tigers podcast. I'm the basketball beat writer, Steven Johnson. I'm joined by my guy, the football beat writer, Frank Bonner. How you doing, man?
I'm doing all right.
All right. But before we get started, don't forget to check out some of our other podcasts. Jennifer Biggs hosts Sound Bites. Eric Barnes hosts The Sidebar. And my guys, Chris Harrington and Drew Hill, record the Grizzlies podcast every week. You can find all of these and the Tigers podcast anywhere you get your podcast, Spotify, Apple Podcasts, dailymemphian.com. So check out us and check out the gang. But of course, you know, the Tigers are coming off a big win. Had a couple freshmen show out last week against Nicholls State. So Frank, there's another big game coming up against Arkansas State. The Tigers are only, last time I looked, a 5.5 point favorite. So they're not even favored a touchdown right now. I guess there was some breaking news that I'm sure we're going to get into in a second, but just overall in the game, what are some of your thoughts about what Memphis can expect against Arkansas State this week?
Well, I think for one, if you look at the two quarterbacks from Arkansas State, you had James Blackman, who started the first half, and then Hatcher, who went 12 for 12 in the second half with 4 touchdowns. So I would assume that he'd be their starter. They saw him last year, and so they kind of know what to expect from him. But talking to the coaching staff, they're preparing for both quarterbacks. But I think we'll probably see Hatcher for Arkansas State, who, you know, they're used to seeing from last season.
Yeah, I definitely saw him last year. The game, it was one of those games where Memphis always felt in control, but the score was probably closer than I think fans wanted it to be. So I think it'll be interesting now. I think the Tigers are a little bit better on defense than they were starting off. The offense is kind of hard to tell when you play an opponent like Nicholls State. But I guess what were just your overall impressions of the run game led by freshman Brandon Thomas?
Well, I think Brandon Thomas was everything that everybody was saying he was in fall camp. When you talk about who's going to be their featured guy, I mean, they found it in Brandon Thomas. But he wasn't just Brandon. I mean, he rushed for 147 yards, but them as a team ran for 322. So if you look at that offense, having a run game when you have a freshman quarterback in Seth Hennigan, I think will help make him more comfortable, especially going against a better opponent in Arkansas State, who's going to be a little bit more ready for them than Nicholls State was. So I think Brandon Thomas getting going on Saturday would be huge for them to get in the win.
Speaking of Seth Hennigan, true freshman made history in his first start, and it looks like he's going to be the quarterback for at least the foreseeable future. Some news broke today that Grant Gunnell, the guy, Arizona transfer, who was expected, I think, to be QB1, looks like he's be having surgery. Timetable is unclear, but it doesn't sound like they expect him back, you know, anytime soon. So I guess how does that impact the team, if at all, Frank?
Well, I think, you know, you never want to see a player have to go through surgery. So, prayers to Grant Gunnell. Hopefully he comes out on the other end. But in terms of Seth Hennigan, I mean, if you look at what he did last Saturday, I think he's ready for the moment. And I think if you're the team going forward, you know that Seth is going to be your guy. Keelan's the backup. But I think you just rally around your freshman quarterback at this point, and you give him even more confidence than he already has. He's a confident guy, talking to him after the game, so he's pretty sure of himself. And so I think you just, breed as much of that into your freshman as you can to make him more comfortable going into this next game and obviously further down the line.
Absolutely. I think that confidence for Seth comes from before he enrolled at Memphis, he won a state championship with Denton Ryan. He's a coach's son. He grew up playing big-time football. So I think, like you say, he's used to the moment. I guess what's the most impressive thing about his performance that stood out to you?
He didn't force a lot of times when you get a freshman quarterback, they may try to force things. And you look at one of the plays that was really impressive. It was in the red zone. He was getting some pressure, and instead of trying to force something that could have turned into a turnover or whatever, he opted to throw the ball away, and on the next play they scored. And so I think those simple plays out of a freshman are huge in the grand scheme of things, and he knows when not to try to do something extra if it's not there. And so I think that's big for a freshman quarterback, and I think we'll continue to see that part of him grow as we get later into the season.
So I was following the game along on Twitter. I was watching some other games. Y'all don't kill me, but I saw that Nichols started off with a kind of march down the field, kind of effortlessly. And I know with the Tigers' defense putting so much expectations and pressures on themselves, it seemed like that could have been a moment where they lost a little bit, but it seems they rebounded. How did the defense perform after giving up that opening score?
Yeah, I think they rebounded pretty nicely. I think that's one of the things you pay attention to because defenses, they're going to get scored on. But how do you respond after getting scored on, especially on the opening drive? And they responded by forcing punts in the next 5 possessions. And Nicholls State didn't score another touchdown until, the third quarter. So I think they responded well. They got a lot of veterans on that team, and so you knew they were going to get that group together. And so if you're the defensive coordinator, you coach Mack, there are some things obviously you want to work on. They got pressure on the quarterback, but they didn't get him down. But all in all, I think you leave away from that game liking what you saw, how they responded after that opening drive.
All right, one player we talked about last week kind of standing out on the depth chart was freshman Greg Rupin, White Station alum. No, I think he had 2 pass breakups. What was, I guess, your early impression of what he did on the field?
Yeah, he had those 2 pass breakups, and I think he was pretty active out there in the secondary, and that's what you want to see. And I think as he continues to get more comfortable in his role, you'll see even greater things. But I think he had a nice showing in his first opening game, and then in terms of looking forward, I know J.J. Russell. A lot of people are ready for that Mississippi State game, and I know one thing that J.J. Russell said is he said, we shouldn't be thinking about Mississippi State because if we're looking at Mississippi State now, then we're going to get, dropped against Arkansas State. And so I think this defense is going to look at what they did last week and continue to try to hone in on some things. And, Greg Rubin is a part of that.
A part of the secondary, who were the first 3 corners? With Jacoby Francis, Barnett, and Rubin?
Mm-hmm.
I think that could be a really talented secondary, especially by the end of the season. But just overall, your first impressions of Week 1, we saw Mississippi State have trouble with Louisiana Tech. UCF had to kind of come back. I think Houston kind of blew a lead against Texas Tech. Just overall first impression, we know this is a week-by-week thing. I guess, has your outlook on the Tigers' schedule changed at all now that we've seen some of their opponents play a game now?
Yeah, I think, and looking at the conference, there's some teams who you would say kind of underperformed a little bit. Mm-hmm. And so if you're Memphis, you're like, well, maybe we can, get a step up and overperform of our expectations. And so depending on how these next 2 weeks go, I think that's going to tell a lot about what this Memphis outlook is going to be. I try not to make too many major observations after week 1, but once you get past week 3, mm-hmm. especially with Arkansas State and Mississippi State on the schedule, you can kind of try to dictate what type of season they're going to have. But as of right now, if you're Memphis, you feel like you're in a good position to do something good in this conference.
And I guess last was just from the football angle. How much more added pressure is there on the defense when it looks like Gunnell is going to be out for an extended period of time? And I know Seth looked pretty good last week, but the competition is going to get better, and this still is a true freshman quarterback. It's 18, 19 years old. So how much more pressure is the defense going to put on itself to maybe kind of carry the load?
To be honest with you, man, I don't know if you can put any more pressure on yourself than what J.J. Russell was putting on this defense. I mean, he's saying that, we've got to go out and basically knock people in the mouth. And so I don't think this changes the outlook specifically for a leader like J.J. Russell because he's already came into this year putting a lot of pressure on the defense. And so if you're taking from his leadership, you were kind of already at that mark, whether you had Gunnell or not. And so I think from a fan perspective, they're going to be the ones putting a little bit more pressure on the defense. But I think the defense is already kind of doing that for themselves.
Yeah, I hope fans this is a unique situation. Guys like J.J. Russell, Jacoby Francis, Thomas Pickens, and some other guys really being able to come back for that 5th year. Just having those guys back, it seems like J.J. Russell, in terms of just being the heart and soul of that defense, at least, like I said, heart and soul, it seems like he's kind of taking that role. I know he's very ambitious, not only his goals on the field. You kind of did a great piece on kind of his faith off the field. So I think he's going to be another Tiger that has a big year defensively. So it's been pretty quiet on the basketball front. Anything you're curious about? I've been enjoying it, y'all, just so y'all know. But
yeah, I know we talked last about Rasheed Wallace getting familiar. I don't know how many times you've been able to talk to some of these players, but just what's the vibe around the program from the inside perspective?
I think everybody's excited. Everybody's saying the right things. Everybody's saying that, hey, we're gonna buy in, and I think that's what the Tigers need. Like there were a number of guys that probably before they got Imani Bates and Jalen Duren that were going to probably have bigger roles, bigger expectations, more touches. But when you bring in 2 potential top 5 picks, that changes the math a little bit. So the players, I think right now understand that some people are going to have to sacrifice. There's going to be a lot of competition. There are going to be some talented guys that are at the end of the bench that may have to take their red shirt year. But overall, I think everybody around the program has kind of took a big deep breath because it was just such a run over this last month and a half. I think everybody's catching their breath. And I think for the program, I think everybody's just excited about now they can kind of focus on the court, practicing and sorting out these rotations that get closer to the season.
Now, from a chemistry perspective, how long do you think it'll take for them to kind of mesh in their roles that you were just talking about, with the starting 5 on down?
Ultimately, if ideally you would want to kind of maybe have that hammered up when you go to Brooklyn, the NIT season tip-off against Virginia Tech. That's going to be kind of like their first signature game. They have some games, I think, against Murray State after that. I think they play Western Kentucky and maybe St. Louis beforehand. I could be getting it mixed up. So there are a couple games before you get there, but I would want to say that they'll probably mark the first quarter of the season if you want to kind of divvy the season up into 4. So when you go face Virginia Tech, who I think is going to be a top 35, top 25 team, that's what they're projected to be anyway. You would probably like to have a solidified starting 5. And on that second unit, I think the Tigers could easily go 10 deep if they want. At the very least, you want to have at least a core group of 3 guys that you can bring out the bench as well, too. So I'm circling that Virginia Tech game, but that could also be the game where Penny realizes, okay, we might have to make some more changes as well, too.
Yeah, because, going 10 deep, do you think that I guess that's a winnable model late in the season to still be going that deep?
I mean, it's possible. We've seen it done before. Kentucky a couple years ago when they almost went undefeated, they did the whole platoon type of thing. I was looking it up earlier today. I think North Carolina, Roy Williams' last team went 9 deep. But honestly, by the time they get to the tournament, man, they'll probably have 8 guys. But it's just in my opinion, their second unit is so talented. You're talking potentially Alex Lomax, Chandler Lawson, Josh Minot, top 50 recruit. Someone between Earl Timberlake, Landers Nolly, or Leston Quinones, who are all 3 players are guys that could easily, contend for all conference type of honors, plus like a Malcolm Dandridge. So if that's your second unit, man, I'm not saying that's a top 25 team, but that's a good team that could really give teams a run for their money in terms of being the starting 5. So I think early on you have to go that deep because you have to give guys an opportunity to kind of earn the lion's share of the minutes. But I think when it comes March Madness, you'll probably see them 7 or 8 deep.
And my last question for you is, you've been around, Penny Hardaway for some time now. How do you think Hardaway and Rasheed Wallace's, coaching demeanors are going to mesh?
Well, I think it will definitely be a player first, player centric type of approach. I think we kind of touched on it last week. She's going to be so big for the players, man, just kind of being that cool uncle, just maybe the cool coach you can confide in. So I think he's really here for the kids, Rasheed, and he's here to just make sure, they all are improving as men on and off the court. And like you said, he wants them to get paid. And Penny, I think like, ego's going to be a thing on the coaching staff as well, too. But in my mind, the fact that Penny brought in Rasheed Wallace and Larry Brown at the same time, I think he's trying to surround himself not necessarily with yes men, but more guys that can kind of push him and continue to challenge him as a coach and have their own ideas. Rasheed's won a championship. Larry's won multiple championships as well, too. So I think those guys will all help Penny grow as a coach. And I'm not just talking about X's and O's. I'm talking about with player development, player relationships. So I think right now Penny is going to be challenged in a good way, and I think it's going to really help out the team.
Well, it's a lot to be excited about if you're a Memphis football Tigers basketball and football fan.
It's a great time for the city. The football team started off 1-0. I think they have a great shot at starting off 2-0, and then they'll set the stage for a huge game in Mississippi State, probably the biggest one. It wasn't that long ago when the program played SMU on College Game Day. So it's about to be an exciting time. Thank y'all for joining us for the latest edition of the Daily Memphis Tigers podcast. We'll be back next week.
In-depth journalism in the Memphis community, the Daily Memphian is of Memphis, not just in Memphis, and seeks to tell the stories of this city. TheDailyMemphian.com. Truth in place.